Hi, I'm Lori Enns, the SSH Writing Center Coordinator at Nazarbayev University. To find out more about our online personal writing consultations, please visit our website. Normally we hold our writing workshops at the university in a classroom face-to-face, but it's summer 2020 and most of us are staying close to home during the pandemic. So we decided to make our writing workshops into webinars, and this is the second one in our suite. Our speaker is Jeff Carney. He's a faculty member at the SSH Writing Program, and I'm going to pass it over to him now. So take it away, Jeff.
Okay, thank you, Lori, and good morning. It looks like we have a very good crowd. I am excited. Let me bring up my presentation. Okay, how's that?
Thank you. Yep.
Okay.
Good.
So the subject of this is paraphrase, obviously, and this belongs to a much larger concept, which involves taking ideas from source material and putting it somehow into our essays or scholarly articles. There are three basic ways to do this, and you already know what they are. Direct quotation, by which we mean reproducing an author's exact words. Summarizing, where we briefly state the general sense of an idea without all the details. And paraphrase, today's topic, which is presenting another writer's ideas in your own words without significantly changing the idea. So let's take a look at an example. Ooh, that's ugly. That is a picture of an Anopheles mosquito, an insect, and I wanted to make sure everybody knew what one of those was because the sample passage we're going to look at is about the Anopheles mosquito. So let's read through that quickly. The genetic modification of organisms extends to irreversibly exterminating certain species. Although humans have been waging war on Anopheles mosquitoes for hundreds of years via chemical, mechanical, and other means, they remain one of humanity's greatest natural enemies. Biotechnology has allowed the creation and release of hordes of sterile males designed to crash population numbers when they mate with wild females. So my goal here was to give you something that had a little bit of an academic flavor, but it's the kind of thing that students in rhetoric and composition might easily encounter as a source. And here's a paraphrase that I wrote. Oh my goodness. All right. Another potential use of genetic modification is controlling or even eradicating whole species of animals. Holt discusses the example of the Anopheles mosquito. For centuries, humankind has tried everything from machinery to chemistry to wipe out the insect, but we have been unable to do so. Genetic modification might change all that. One strategy has been to return sterile male mosquitoes to their natural habitat so they can breed with normal females. The result is that fewer mosquitoes are born. We can tell that this is a paraphrase because obviously a bunch of words have been changed. Grammar has been changed. This is very important. And some organization has been changed. A lot of students believe that all we need to do to write a good paraphrase is to sort of take out a word and replace it with another word. You do that enough times and you've got a good paraphrase. And that is just false. A good paraphrase needs to show us real differences in grammar and organization. Ultimately, a good paraphrase should look like your own writing, as if you were starting off from scratch. So let's talk about your basic goals when you're trying to write a paraphrase. Number one is to achieve integrity, honesty. That is to say, avoiding plagiarism. When you are submitting an essay for credit or publication, the implicit assumption is that your work is your work. that you are the person who wrote all the words that are not in quotation marks. If you fail to paraphrase correctly, then you could be guilty of plagiarism. Here's a definition. Intentionally or carelessly presenting the work of another writer as one's own. Submitting an assignment purporting to be a student's original work, which has wholly or in part been created by another person. It also includes the presentation of work ideas, representations, or words of another person without customary and proper acknowledgement of sources. Let's look at that word carelessly. It does not matter at Nazarbayev University what your intention is. If you accidentally plagiarize, then you're going to get in as much trouble as if you had done it intentionally. To be clear, plagiarism is work that was created by someone else. And plagiarism can also happen when you are not using citations correctly. Penalties for plagiarism. At NU, at the minimum, you will fail a graded assignment. You might fail the course. You might lose your stipend. You might be dismissed from the university in extreme cases. If you are a scholar, you could ruin your academic career forever. So I hope that I've scared you a little bit. This is something you want to pay attention to. All right, in addition to integrity, accuracy. A real danger when paraphrasing material is changing the meaning in a significant way. So you want to make sure that you don't make any significant changes to what you are paraphrasing. That's why I like to make sure that we have an editing step for writing paraphrases, so that you can always go back and make sure that the meaning looks like the original. Suitability, by which I mean you want to paraphrase to support your goals. It is really easy when using source material to feel that for a few sentences your sources are suddenly in charge of that section of your paper, and that's completely false. You want your paraphrase to be part of what you're writing. It should be supporting the point of your paragraph, the point of your essay. And to some extent, that will mean that when you're choosing words for your paraphrase, that those will be the things that support your goals. Finally, consistency. Readers will feel most comfortable if you are using a consistent vocabulary and style. If you have 4 different sources and each one uses slightly different words for the same idea, you can do your readers a service by consistently using just one word for that idea, as long as it doesn't change the meaning. All right. We want to note different kinds of language that we're going to find in our source material. The terms that I'm going to use, I have completely invented. I find them useful, but don't expect to find them in a textbook. First, let's start by talking about public language. A lot of the words and phrases you're going to encounter state an idea very clearly and plainly, and they are usually the words that everybody uses when discussing your subject. For example, technical terminology, the names of people, places, events, and organizations. Numbers like dates, statistics, and monetary values. I call these public because they really don't originate with your sources. Their history goes back maybe hundreds of years. They've just been part of the culture for a while. In the sample passage, Anopheles is a technical term. Male, female, These are essentially, use these exactly as the special substitutes for these. So some guidelines for using public language. Familiar names and technical terms should be used at the very least on the first reference. Subsequently, if substitutes are available, you might try one. Most public language can be paraphrased, but it doesn't have to be. Some public language should never be paraphrased. Let's consider those three words we looked at a moment ago. Anopheles mosquito, definitely on the first reference, but in subsequences you might call that the insect. But when you're talking about animals, there is no other way to describe male and female. You would get really silly if you called them men and women, or boys and girls, or mommies and daddies. Just stick with male and female. Public language removed from its original context does not require quotation marks. Again, because these are not words that are particular to your source. Moving on. Stylistic language, and this is where the big work happens. Some words and phrases represent stylistic choices made by the source. If you imagine that the same idea could be expressed in multiple ways, then you'll know the author made a conscious choice to use this particular expression instead of some other expression. It's not like Anopheles mosquito. The culture gave us those terms. We have to use that. But now we're talking about terms where the author made a decision. This is especially true with figurative language. Here's an example from the sample passage. Waging war. This is not literal by any means. In fact, it's a little bit inaccurate. Wars are fought between political entities. They are not fought by mosquitoes. That's just the way that is. Now, it's a pretty colorful phrase, waging war, but don't think that when I say stylistic language, I always mean colorful phrases. They remain, also from the sample passage, is very ordinary, nothing stylistically special about that. All I'm really saying when I put this together as stylistic language, again, is that the author chose this way to phrase an idea. Let's look at it in context. They remain one of humanity's greatest natural enemies. And here is how I paraphrased that. We have been unable to wipe out the insect. I think you'll agree the ideas pretty much are the same, but I have approached them from a very different perspective. So it ends up looking quite different. So some guidelines about stylistic language. This is really simple. Stylistic language must always be paraphrased. Of course, you can quote it, but if you're writing a paraphrase, then these are the words and phrases that just absolutely must be changed in some way. And most of the language in your sources is going to be stylistically, so you can expect to be making a lot of changes. Finally, functional language. Many words and phrases serve a grammatical function without contributing much to the content or style, such as articles, pronouns, prepositions, auxiliary verbs. Let's take a look at the sample passage once again. And here it is with me whiting out everything that's got some content to it. These are all words that are functional. They really don't do anything. I think of them as grammatical glue, and we don't want to keep the grammatical glue because here are our guidelines about functional language. Paraphrase material should use as little of the original functional language as possible, which is a smaller piece of the much larger guideline that says paraphrase material should use as little of the original grammar as possible. Okay, steps to writing a good paraphrase. I like to do some preparation to begin with. This might be things that you do mentally. You might take notes of some kind. Number one, understand the passage that you want to paraphrase. It's really easy to substitute words of a passage that you only understand, sort of. But it's really hard to make grammatical changes and make it fit with your style and be consistent with the rest of your paper if you don't understand it completely. You can test your understanding by looking away from the passage and just trying in your own words to say it aloud. Many instructors recommend using this moment to do the same thing by telling a friend. See if your friend can understand what it is that you're trying to explain. If either one of you gets confused, then go back, read some more. Identify the relationships between ideas in your passage. Does one thing cause another thing? Is one thing an example of another thing? You've probably got a textbook either online or in your hand that names transitional words and phrases. These might end up making good substitutions for the way the relationships are originally identified. Identify the types of language, the public language, the stylistic, the functional language. If you can, try pasting your passage into your word processing app and then use different colors to identify the different types of language. Evaluate the public language. Get a basic sense which words should not be changed at all, which words should not be changed on the first reference. Evaluate the stylistic language. Some words might be changed with simple substitutions. Some phrases might require larger substitutions. One phrase for another phrase, or putting something into a very, very different structure. So let's identify some of those substitutions. First, choose a level of precision for what you're working on. Can you round some numbers up? Can you use a different name for something? Like if you were writing about Nur Sultan, would it be appropriate to sometimes call it the capital city? Locate synonyms. In the original passage, we saw the word exterminating. I paraphrase that as eradicating. In the original passage, we saw the word mate. I paraphrase that as breed. Very often, simple substitutions will present themselves to you. Use a thesaurus to find these if you're having a hard time pulling them out of your own brain. But be very careful with a thesaurus. It is very easy to choose a word that you don't understand completely, and that could end up making a mess. So make sure you know the meaning that you're getting at, and make sure you know how a word is used grammatically so that your sentences sound good. Here's an example of a phrase in the sample passage: wild female mosquitoes. One synonym for the word wild that you might find is the one that the authors intended here, which might mean something like natural or found in nature. But you might also run across words like rowdy or uninhibited, which means something very, very different. What does rowdy female mosquitoes even mean? I get a very different picture of this. Maybe female mosquitoes in bikinis dancing around on a beach somewhere, which is not the intention. So, locating synonyms. Sometimes you will want to paraphrase ideas instead of words. In fact, you'll probably want to do this a lot of the time. So here's a group of words: crash population numbers. That's from the original. The word crash here is being used as a verb. It means to drastically decrease. But if you tried to paraphrase this as 3 separate words, you'd look for a synonym for crash and you might choose collide. You look for a synonym for population, you come up with inhabitants. You choose a synonym for numbers, you come up with digits. Collide, inhabitants, digits, that doesn't mean a thing. But I frequently see students trying to use phrases like that as if they were meaningful. And that's a picture of me looking very confused, which is not the state that I want to be in when I'm reading papers. We could end up with something like fewer mosquitoes are born, which is not a substitution of those individual words at all. I'm looking at the concept in a much larger way and trying to fit it into the grammatical structures that I have already put into the paraphrase, which is really quite different from the original. Ooh, happy face. Be flexible with names if the level of precision that you've chosen will permit it. You know this guy, President Donald Trump. You probably want to call him that on the first reference. Depending on your level of precision, after that, you might paraphrase that to just Trump, the president, the commander-in-chief of the United States military. Sometimes maybe the real estate mogul, perhaps the businessman. In some contexts, maybe the former reality show star. Keep that word context in mind as you are choosing substitutions. Make sure that it fits the context that you are writing about. You can be flexible with statistics sometimes, depending on the level of precision you've chosen. So you might encounter a statistic like 87.32%, and you might need to reproduce that exactly. But you might be able to paraphrase it sometimes. 87% is pretty close. That suitable paraphrase in most circumstances. Nearly 90% if you wanted to look at it from a different direction. Roughly 9 out of 10, or even just 9 out of 10. Again, depending on the context and what you think your readers will expect. Be flexible with dates. You might encounter an event that happened on 12 January 1947. It might be appropriate to say that it happened in 1947, or perhaps soon after World War II, or maybe the 1940s, or maybe in the mid-20th century. It's time to start thinking about writing. And I always suggest, as a first attempt, just go for it. Just try putting this stuff down on the page. Evaluate your accuracy, see if you made any mistakes, but give it a try. If you're struggling with that, there are some other strategies we can use. Like, move one idea. See what that gets you. It will often lead to additional grammatical structures. So here's our original sentence. Although humans have been waging war on Anopheles mosquitoes for hundreds of years, via chemical, mechanical, and other means, they remain one of humanity's greatest natural enemies. Here's the paraphrase I wrote. For centuries, humankind has tried everything from machinery to chemicals to wipe out the insect, but we have been unable to do so. One of the things I asked myself was, what happens if I take this idea hundreds of years and, yeah, change the words, but also put it to the front of my paraphrase? What other kinds of things would change? Now, I don't know about you, but it's just going to sound funny to me if I go from 4 centuries to although. For centuries, although, I don't like the sound of that. So I know that I'm going to want to move this word although to later in the sentence, changing the word, and I arrive at but. And now my grammar is starting to look a little bit different. And for some reason, that just suggested to me that maybe I could take this chemical and mechanical idea and move it sooner in the sentence. And just those little changes required additional grammatical changes, and the result looks pretty different. Split sentences, especially long sentences. This is a strategy I personally use a lot because I think shorter sentences are often much easier to understand. So here's an original from the sample passage. Biotechnology has allowed the creation and release of, hordes of males designed to crash population numbers when they mate with females. The paraphrase, genetic modification, might change all that. One strategy has been to return sterile male mosquitoes to their natural habitat so they can breed with normal females. The result is that fewer mosquitoes are born. So I took this biotechnology idea and, yeah, I changed the genetic modification so it was consistent with the previous reference. And I just made it in its own short little sentence. I took this idea of crashing population numbers, put it in its own little sentence, and then I decided to keep the sequence of cause and effect consistent. So I put it at the end of the paraphrase. So I'm splitting ideas into shorter units, changing some words, and reorganizing things here. Reorganize lists. You're going to find a lot of lists in academic prose that you want to paraphrase, often full of technical terms. And you're going to look at it and you're going to think, that is impossible to paraphrase. I need a lot of those technical terms. But there are some strategies we can use. I wish I had a longer example, but this little one will do. In our original, we had this 3-item list: chemical, mechanical, and other means. I paraphrase that to everything from machinery to chemistry. So one of the strategies that we can use is to eliminate some items. You're under no obligation to keep every item in a list. You would make that choice, but often you can delete some. Here, it was more of a change that I made. It was originally a list item, and I changed it into more of an introductory phrase, everything from machinery to chemistry. If the list was longer, I could have eliminated 5 items. I might want to introduce them then with a phrase like such as, so my reader knows that this was not the complete list. Let's see, what else I can do is rearrange the items. This seems so simple, but helpful. So in the original, the word chemical came first, and in the paraphrase, the word chemistry now comes last. You can do that especially well with a long list, as long as your sequence makes a kind of sense. You can also change the grammatical function. And I did that here because chemical and mechanical are adjectives, and I turned them into nouns. They are related words, but slightly different words. Finally, edit your paraphrase. Things to look for. Accuracy. Is it correct? Does it have the right level of precision? Have you maintained the relationships, cause and effect, sequence, chronology? or have you confused those somehow? Evaluate the language. Is it clear? This is especially important. Remember that it's paraphrase. It is now your sentence, your passage of writing. Take complete responsibility for it. Have you changed the grammatical structure sufficiently? Have you chosen words that make sense, even though they are different from the... And the rule of three, which is kind of made up, it says that you should really have no more than 3 words in their original sequence from the original. And honestly, there's nothing special about that. But if you are an NU student and you know your paper is going to be checked for plagiarism by Turnitin, you should know that there is a setting instructors can select that will determine how many words in a sequence you can use before it gets flagged as possible plagiarism. And the default number for that is 3. Exceptions. Groups of words that almost always come together. Nobody's going to look at you writing the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan and think, oh, that's plagiarism, too many words. Don't worry about that. Similarly, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, I said that badly. Those 4 words, they always travel together. So don't worry about using them. And there's probably a lot of phrases that you can think of. Lori, how are we doing for time?
So we have 2 questions. What we could do is we can post the slides on the website. So I'm just going to look at the questions we have now. The first one is, do we have to paraphrase all the words one by one, or just a main part of the text?
Okay, I think I addressed that. Sometimes one by one works best, but as I think I said, sometimes it works best to get the general sense of an idea and just rephrase it completely. And that is especially true with figurative language, such as comparisons, metaphors, where you don't necessarily need any metaphor at all, and it works better to get a general sense. Another question?
Yep. Second question, how accurate should we be when paraphrasing?
That is going to depend on your goals and your audience's expectations. For example, if you are summarizing or paraphrasing information that you got from a secondary source as part of the literature review for an empirical research report that you're putting together, you probably want to reproduce statistics very, very accurately. If you're writing in a somewhat more casual context, then you could paraphrase and do some rounding and so on. I think if you were writing about statistics for a humanities class, that in most cases a rough approximation would be sufficient. But again, get a feel for your reader's expectations. If you're not sure, ask your instructor.
Okay, we have another question. Are there any exercises or tools to improve paraphrasing skills? So maybe there's something that you know of on the internet that you really like, some exercise?
Boy, I don't. I wish I did. Boy, I'm stumped with that one. I should probably take a look.
Well, and maybe the part of it, like you were suggesting before, like just get feels for, so if you're reading a text, you can then close the book and then just try to remember what you read in different words. Try to use your own words to express the ideas that you just read? Bother anybody in your household to listen to you? Okay, we have another.
I think one thing that you might do is look at an article that you're interested in. Identify a sentence or a passage where it seems pretty clear that the article is paraphrasing material from a source. Find that source. Find the spot where they seem to be paraphrasing and get a sense of how they did it. I think if you do that enough times, you will have a much better sense of what academics really do than if you were to look at samples that were created for students.
Right. That sounds like really good advice. Find something that you're interested in too. Someone else writes, how should we understand that our paraphrased text is written clearly without the help of a teacher?
Get a friend's advice. You probably have at least one friend whose English is pretty good. And they can help you at least with that aspect of it. If you're more concerned whether you're paraphrasing technical material clearly enough, give it to a non-technical reader, somebody who's majoring in a different subject and they haven't taken this class that you're working on. See if they can understand it.
Okay. And is it really vital to change the grammatical structure? Sometimes grammar is pretty okay, and I don't want to change it.
Yes, it is essential. That's because the grammar is also something that the original author created, and you need to be creating your own grammatical structure. And there are benefits to that as well. When you're trying to insert a paraphrase into your own writing, the original grammar might have that sentence beginning and ending with words that don't flow very well from a sentence that you wrote and don't flow well into your next sentence. If you're thinking about your sentence, your source's idea, and your next sentence as a unit, then you'll be able to make sure that the grammar of all of that flows together as smoothly as possible.
So it's your best bet to try and change the grammar. Oh, we have a couple more questions before we need to clock out. What do we have to do if the text contains a lot of quotations?
Oh, wow. Sometimes you can keep the quotations, and in which case you'll need to identify the sources of the quotations. And if there's a lot, that can get kind of messy. Mm-hmm. It might be better to paraphrase everything, but also try to find a way to identify both sources. Your system of documentation somewhere in the guidelines should provide a way that you can cite both sources, the source that you've been reading and the source that your source is quoting, so that they both get the correct credit.
Like an embedded reference.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that it feels like most people now are asking for the presentation, and indeed we will try to post this when we can. We just need to edit it a little bit, get out the glitches. So if you can just be patient and wait for that. We're going to put it on the Writing Center website. Stay tuned, and we are very glad you joined us. Thank you for your questions, and we hope that this is helpful for you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Okay, bye to everyone.